Hello everyone, Sir Midnight here. I just wanted to say that I just created a Patreon page, and you can go there today, and for only $5 a month, you can get special access to my episodes early and bonus episodes whenever I create them. By becoming an early access patron, you will be able to listen to my episodes a day or 2 days in advance. The files will not include music, sound effects, or anything special. Just you and my voice to soothe your soul. A complete raw file of the entire episode. So if you would like to support me and get access to those early episodes, go to www.patreon.com/Sir Midnight's World of Horror. And now, let's get on to the episode. I used to see him often. Well, I guess I shouldn't say him. More like it. Then I moved away to another state, another city. I don't see it anymore. Not physically, though it creeps through my mind in its swooping, slinking way. High up in the air one moment, then sliding across the ground the next, over and over, its limbs propelling it forward. The mere thought sends ice-cold shivers running down my spine. It used to watch me, but it can't anymore. At least I don't think it can. I wouldn't be surprised, however, to wake in the early hours of the day when the sky is still dark, and look to my window to see those eyes, those teeth, see it smile, that awful smile. I hope I'm dead before that day arises. I hope I've seen the last of that monster. When I was little, I lived in a small suburban neighborhood. It isn't the kind you're probably thinking of, big, white uniform houses all lined up in perfect rows with green lawns and 2 garage doors. No, my neighborhood was much older. It was built sometime in the 50s and every house looked different, but most had started to fall apart. The people living there were hardworking and honest for the most part, and their long, hard lives showed on their faces. No one really talked to anyone else. That was one of the only things I didn't like about that neighborhood. My mother always said the neighbors just liked to keep to themselves, that they had nothing very important to say, anyway. Looking back on it now, I think they did have something important to say. Something very, very important. I saw it for the first time when I was 8 years old during the summer. It was very hot that season, unusually so compared to all the summers I've had since then, so I'd stayed inside most of the morning. Then, after lunch, my father hooked up the sprinkler we used for our garden in the backyard. I excitedly got into play clothes and rushed outside into the blinding sun. Those were the days. Those were the innocent days in the sun where I played without a care. I had no idea I would soon be missing them. So I was outside, running and laughing and jumping through the cool spray of water, when I saw it. At first I didn't notice it. It was just a rustle in the bushes. Then it was the crack of a branch and I looked up. Something dark moved through those leaves. Something as black as midnight. Yet it shimmered when the sun hit it. It ran, or galloped, to this day I'm still not sure what to call it, from a small forest behind my house, leapt over my neighbor's fence and disappeared from my view. I was curious, so I chased it. The pavement burned my feet, but I didn't care. I watched along with a few other neighborhood children as the creature swept in and out of the shadows of trees, making its way down the street. It was large, probably about 8 feet tall, and it stood upright, though it never did. Instead, it stayed hunched over, its hind legs curled up at its sides, the knees protruding grotesquely past its torso. Large, white, curled claws grew from bony feet and long, slender fingers. Its arms were gnarled to the joints, bulging under twisted muscle and skin. Skin that was black and rubbery, stretched thin over whatever bones the beast had. It caved in at odd places and almost looked as if it were rotting. Still, when it crept through the sun, patches glistened gray and blue, as if it were made of some kind of foreign glass. You know the expression, grinning ear to ear? It was literal in this case, each corner reaching each side of its face, where ears would have been if it had any. Within this smile were 2 rows of pure white teeth, long and sharp. In fact, each tooth was so long it could never close its mouth. The sharp tips just clacked against each other as it skulked around, waving its head slowly from side to side, as if sniffing something in the air. I used to find this silly since it had no nose. Now the thought terrifies me. We kids just watched it in sort of a dazed amazement, never having seen something like it before. I suppose I thought it was just some species I'd yet to learn about in school. I wish that's all it had been. Then our parents called us back inside for dinner and we grudgingly obeyed, not wanting to get in trouble. I'm not sure about the other kids, but I never quite forgot about the creature I'd seen. I got preoccupied with other things, sure, but its image was always in the back of my mind, burning there, waiting for me to remember it late at night while I tried to drift off to sleep. It got its wish. That night, I was laying in bed with my covers pulled up to my chin, despite how hot I was. The nightlight across the room barely gave me comfort from the thoughts of ghouls and ghosts hiding in my closet or under my bed. Then the beast image slipped into my thoughts. I gripped the covers. It hadn't scared me before, yet I'd been more few feet away from it. But now, after having the image sit in my mind all day, my brain registering its unworldly appearance, I started to fear it. It was bad. I knew that now. Then I heard a tap. I froze. Another tap. I didn't dare to move. Then there was another and another and another. It was at my window. I could hear its long claws scrape across the glass, hear its razor-sharp fangs as they clicked together. I could hear its breathing. Heavy, husky, in and out, in and out. Finally, I could no longer bear it. I tore my eyes from my nightlight and gazed through the dark room towards my window. It smiled when it saw me. An impossibly huge grin that split its face in two, white teeth glistening with saliva, gleaming eyes seeming to pull every fear from my conscience and unconscious to the surface. I screamed. By the time my parents rushed into my room, it was gone. No traces of its existence left behind. They said it was just a nightmare. It wasn't just a nightmare. I never saw it in the daytime again, but I saw it every night. After a week, I stopped screaming. I just cried silently in my bed. Then, after another week, I stopped crying. It knew I was scared. I wasn't going to give it the satisfaction of seeing me and tremble. It wasn't until it found the lock on my window that I was truly terrified. I'll never forget the clunk the lock made when it had been moved for the first time in years, or the waning screech of the window as it slid open, or the heavy breathing at my bedside. I'll never forget those eyes as they gazed at me from beyond my covers. It knew I was scared. It thrived on that. It wouldn't leave me alone. Everyone says I went crazy, but I didn't. It just wouldn't leave me alone. I hardly ever slept. My hair started to fall out and I always looked tired. My parents put me here, in this psychiatric hospital. It's a nut house, that's what it is. I'm not crazy. It's been years. Years. The nightmares still happen when I do sleep, so they keep me here. I suppose I like it better this way though. After all, the monster can't get me here. You know, the funny thing is, I can't even remember where I used to live. I can't even remember the state or the city. I can't even remember the country. As legend goes, to become a skinwalker you must attain priesthood and then kill a member of your own family. Then and only then you can gain the powers to shapeshift. Then and only then you are a true skinwalker. According to local folklore, a man had done just that. An Indian priest had supposedly not only killed one, but 5 immediate members of his family. They never caught this man. He disappeared into the woods, never to be seen again. When Jason and Alex set out for their camping trip, they knew all the old legends, and they laughed at the idea that a skinwalker would come and get them if they trespassed on the old Indian land, the same land that the supposed murders had taken place. And why should they believe the legends? A man becoming a beast was probably the most ridiculous imaginable. Jason and Alex were brothers. They spent their entire lives together until Jason had gotten married. Then Jason moved away and started a family. But not Alex. Alex stayed in their hometown, tending to their parents, making an honest living off the land, and tried to be a good person. And Alex had succeeded at this. He hadn't broken a commandment in years, and was well on his way, well in his own mind, to heaven. 3 years had passed between their last get-together, and 3 more might have passed if Alex didn't insist on a camping trip. But insist he did, and there they were. It was getting dark, and the 2 of them were laying out under the stars. They were deep in the woods, and they had no GPS or maps. But they knew the path back from where they were. They had gone there as kids. Never know. Huh? Alex replied. He only caught bits and pieces sometimes. We can never let Dad know, Jason reiterated. Know what? That we stayed on the old Indian land past dark. We promised him as kids, and I wouldn't want to upset him now. He's getting pretty close to dead, and if we started an argument, now we may not resolve it in time for, you know. Just don't tell him or Ma, okay? Okay, no problem. They both were silent for a while, until up creeped a small raccoon. Well, look at that, Alex called as he pointed towards the critter. It stared at them for several minutes, not moving, not attempting to flee when they motioned towards it. It stayed almost perfectly still, and then finally it left. Minutes later came a deer. Again, the creature stayed and watched them. Unwavering determination glared in its eyes. For about 2 hours, the duo was kept awake as every animal they knew to live in the forest, and some they were almost sure didn't inhabit the area, came to gaze upon them. The final animal was a gray wolf. It slowly moved towards them, and when it was 5 feet away, it stopped. Don't move. Don't panic. It'll go, Jason assured Alex. The wolf slowly stood up onto its hind legs, and then its limbs began to contort and pop. Horror slid over Jason and Alex's faces as they saw the fur tear open, revealing light brown flesh underneath. Finally, they gazed upon what looked like a man with a wolf head. The skull of the wolf split open like a melon, the fur sliding off of it, the bone chipping and falling like a fragile eggshell, and in its place slowly grew out the head of a man. The man now stood before the paralyzed brothers. They couldn't seem to move. "This is my land," said the man, with an almost supernatural smile. Now, mister, I'm gonna have to ask you to Alex trailed off. "Get away from us," Jason said as fiercely as he could. The man began to laugh, and as he continued to laugh, the pitch changed. It grew deeper, from that of a man to that of a demon, and soon it sounded as if Satan himself was bellowing out at him. The man's skin grew black as coal, and his eyes yellow like a cat's. His demonic laughter echoed through the forest as he drew closer and closer. The brothers being unarmed, they had no other choice than to flee. And that's what they did. They ran as fast as they could, except instead of out to their cars, they were cornered into running deeper into the woods. For hours they seemed to play cat and mouse. Several times animals they passed would burst open in a grotesque manner, revealing the deranged man. But they continued to run. Finally reaching a cabin, they ducked inside. They were filled with fear, and the brothers felt that leaving the cabin would end their deaths. What they found in the cabin made them regret their ignorance on legends. For in the main bedroom of the cabin was corpses, at least 100 of them. Every animal they had seen that night was there, along with some larger bodies, some human bodies. It was then that the man burst into the room. Except he was once more a wolf. In his deep voice he snickered out, "Welcome home." The following week, the authorities found the cabin during their search for Jason and Alex. Both brothers' faces looked as if they were eaten by an animal of some sort. 6 days later, a security camera several states over caught Alex filling up a car with gas. Several eyewitnesses also reported seeing the dead man. And on nearly all accounts, he was seen smiling, a wide, toothy, unnatural grin. Today is the day. Today marks the 1-year anniversary since that horrible night. Although it has been a year, I remember everything so clearly. I remember every thought going through my head. I remember the color of those dead, blackened eyes. I remember the length of those sharp, jagged teeth. I remember every single thing about that. I do not even know what that thing was. For the past year, I have had no other thought than to refer whatever that creature is was a diabolos, which is Latin for devil. Everything had been going so well for me. I was doing great in school, I had the perfect boyfriend, and an exceptional amount of friends. Everything was so perfect, until Amber invited me and a couple of her other friends to her house. At Amber's house, well, everything was bored beyond belief and we were just looking for something fun to do. What usually happens in situations like this is someone suggests a game of truth or dare, and everyone reluctantly agrees as there is nothing better to do. Amber's house is located in the middle of the woods. Within these woods, there is a small waterfall, making it perfect for dares that make people shake with fear. The game progressed slowly because everyone refused to choose dare, fearing the consequences. I, however, wanted to be a brave soul and be the first to choose dare. Dear Lord, I was such a fool. David, my best friend at the time, dared me to take a 15-minute stroll through the woods without a flashlight and without my phone. I thought I had to prove myself to my friends. I somehow managed to push my pride ahead of my judgment in all regards for safety. I was just about to walk outside when I realized that without my phone, I would have no idea when 15 minutes would be up. I turned to David and asked him for his watch. Before handing me the watch, he set it to go off in 15 minutes. With that, I was off to complete my dare. From the moment I stepped outside, I knew something just was not right. I had that burning feeling that I was being watched. I could not go back now. My friends would laugh at me. I had to push through the fear, no matter how much it consumed me. Despite my hopes that the fears would dissolve and I would laugh at my childlike beliefs that a monster was lurking somewhere in the woods, those feelings only grew stronger. Within 5 minutes, all of my senses were heightened. Adrenaline was coursing through my veins and my heart was beating straight through my chest. I tried to tell myself that I was being ridiculous and that I would return to Amber's house within 15 minutes completely unharmed, but my thoughts were shattered by the sound of sticks snapping under the steps of someone or something. I froze dead in my tracks. My heart stopped and found its way into my throat. I wanted to faint, but I knew that if I did, whatever it was that was in the woods with me would find me. I hid behind the tree next to me. That is when I first caught sight of the creature. The Diabolus. The creature was horrendous. It had razor-sharp teeth and gray skin covered in scales. Its eyes, those dark, deep pools of solid black, would have forever engraved themselves into my memory. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I knew that if I dared move a muscle, it would find me. The Diabolus would find me. Relief began to rush in when I saw it become uninterested with the area and continue to a different part of the woods. I was almost happy, all until the watch began to beep. I have never heard anything so loud in my life. The watch beeped so tauntingly as if to say, "Congratulations, your 15 minutes is up. The last 15 minutes of your life, that is." I tried my hardest to conceal the noise, but nothing would work. The creature stopped and whipped its head around, and strangely began to sniff the air. I actually began to wonder what on earth the creature was trying to smell. When it quickly turned its head in my direction, I realized he was trying to determine my scent. The second my gaze met that of the Diabolus, my feet acted on their own and began to run. I have never ran so fast in my life, only because now was the only time that was exactly what I was running for. I ran deeper into the woods, never looking back once. I could hear the Diabolus running behind me. I heard its labored breathing, the breathing of a bloodthirsty creature that would do anything to acquire the flesh of its chosen prey. I found a large rock and began to slide myself under it. I looked at the watch, while at the same time listening to the footsteps of the creature. 11:45, I thought to myself. 11:45 is the time I will die. Exactly 1 hour after leaving the safety of Amber's house will be the time of my death. The footsteps stopped. I listened closely, praying the Diabolus had lost interest in finding me. I shuddered when I realized that it had only paused in an attempt to trace my scent. By the rapid pace of its breathing, I realized the Diabolus was closer to locating me. I quickly bolted out from underneath the rock and ran towards the waterfall. The waterfall was my last hope. I did not dare to look back. As soon as I got to the waterfall, I dove right into the water and hid behind the fall. I closed my eyes and began to think. I had accepted the fact that if the Diabolus was still trying to find me, I would not see daylight ever again. I opened my eyes again. I realized that there was a break in the fall, and I was able to see all around me. Emerging from the woods, I saw the Diabolus. It must have been 7 feet tall. I nearly fainted from fright, but I managed to hold myself together. I saw the creature lift its nose high into the air in hopes of detecting my scent. It stood there for 5 minutes smelling the air. Right then, my prayers had been answered. The creature began to retreat back into the woods. Relief flooded me, making my body go numb. I did not dare to move from my spot behind the waterfall. I stayed there until daylight broke, and I could hear my friends in the distance desperately calling my name. I emerged from the falls and ran into their comforting arms. I told them of the nightmare I had endured throughout the night. They began to look at me strangely, but I told them every single detail. Although it has been a year since that terror-filled night, I still remember every single detail. Most people block out traumatic events and fail to recall simple facts from the event. But because they put me in this big white room with nothing in it and my hands restrained in an odd jacket, I've had nothing better to do but recall every detail for the last 365 days. I tried telling the man in the white jacket with the clipboard my story, but he does not seem to listen to me. The whole time he is in my room, he is writing something on the clipboard. I try to ask him to please let me tell someone my story, but every time he leaves my room I hear him say into a small recording device, "The patient is showing no signs of progress." I wonder what he means by that. The room was dark and empty, a spare room that I hadn't had the chance to do anything with. The electricity had gone out sometime earlier that night, so I had no way to tell time and no source of light except for the flashlight in my hand, my lighter, and the candle I had brought just in case. I was sitting with my back in the far corner of the room, flashlight pointed straight at the door on the other side of the room. The beam of light danced on the wall across from me as my hand shook, terrified, although I had no idea what had been stalking me that day. It started as I was coming back to the old house from the store. I didn't have a care, so I biked, carrying my groceries in 2 plastic bags and a crate hooked up to the rear of my bike. When I got home, I noticed that I was missing a bag of groceries. It must have fallen off when I was riding home. Thinking it nothing more than unfortunate luck, I picked up the one bag and headed inside. After all, I could do without canned goods for a few days. I opened the door and almost immediately tripped on something piled in a heap at the foot of my door just inside the house. The groceries from the bag I was holding flew into the air and scattered as they hit the ground. When I looked back to see what had tripped me, there was a sloppy pile of canned food. Since I never locked my door, I simply dismissed it as a Good Samaritan act from someone who lived in the area and was too shy to introduce themselves. I picked up all the food and stowed it away in the kitchen. It was getting to be about nighttime, so I headed upstairs to my bedroom, got a good book, flipped the switch on the bedside lamp, and entrenched myself in a good story. As the night went on, I started to hear weird noises coming from downstairs in the kitchen. I told myself it was just my imagination because every time I would notice the sounds, they would stop. And when I went back to the story, they would pick up again. My imagination would do that to me from time to time. Before I was able to finish my chapter, the lamp light flickered out. I put my book down, still open, and pages down to save my spot, and went to turn on the main light. Unfortunately, it didn't come on either. The power was out. As I tried to remember where the circuit breaker was, the noises from downstairs resumed. It sounded like someone rummaging around in my kitchen. I grabbed a flashlight from the nightstand drawer, a bat from underneath my bed, and headed downstairs, each of the steps creaking on my way down. When I got to the kitchen, the noises stopped. Bat ready, I pointed my flashlight all around to see where the intruder was, but saw no one. What I did see was the canned food I had recently put away was stacked neatly in a pyramid fashion just beneath the kitchen table. I swallowed hard, thinking that someone was either playing some prank or some sick, twisted game. Slowly I crept towards the table, feet wet from orange juice and milk that had been spilled on the floor. When I got close to the table, I could hear breathing coming from beneath it. I stooped down to look, but saw nothing. Slowly I reached out to touch the pyramid of cans. As soon as my hand made contact, the cans scattered. It was as if something burst through them, scattering them in all directions. I fell back onto the soaked floor and dropped the flashlight. As I frantically grasped for the light, I heard the sound of feet splashing through the puddles on the floor and run out of my kitchen. What struck me as odd was that they weren't human footprints. They were the same width and length, but the toes were much longer, almost as long as fingers. I followed them towards the front door where they disappeared. I relaxed a little, just thankful that whatever it was gone, but I didn't loosen my grip on the bat. Slowly I walked backwards towards the stairs again, planning on locking myself up in my room and waiting till morning. As I did, it sounded like something wet hit the wooden floor in front of me. I pointed my flashlight down at the floor and my heart stopped. There was a new footprint. This one pointed at me. I took another step back. Another wet slap. Another footprint. I turned and ran, tripping up the stairs but making it up to my room. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and pushed the bed up against it, knocking my book down in the process. I set the bat down on the bed for a second and grabbed a lighter and candle out of my nightstand, just in case I would need it. That's when I heard the first squeak. Whatever it was mounting the first step in the staircase. Frantically, I ran to the opposite side of the room, where there was a door that led to a spare room. Upon hearing the second step creak, I threw open the door, which didn't have a lock, ran inside, and headed to the far corner. I sat there quietly, breathing heavily, heart pounding in my ears. I realized that I left my bat on the bed, but was convinced by the creaking of the third and fourth step that it wasn't worth going out to get it. And I sat there, counting the steps as they creaked. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It was getting closer. My hands shook as a tear ran down my cheek. What was going on? 15, 16, 17. I tried to control my breathing. After all, I was trying not to be found. 19, 20, 21. My heart pounded louder. Sweat flattened my hair to my head, and the shaking became worse. 22, 23, 24. My knuckles were white as I clenched the flashlight, whose beam was now dancing all over the wall and rarely landing on the door. 25. It had reached the second floor. Slowly the footsteps got closer as it approached my room. I heard the lock turn, the door creak open, and the bed scrape across the floor. I heard the bat rattle against the wood as it fell off of the bed. And still the footsteps continued. Pages turned as whatever it was picked up my book and looked through it. Then came a thud as it dropped it. It began to rummage through my drawers and my sheets, as if looking for something. Then, everything went still and quiet. The silence was only broken by my quiet sobs and heavy breathing, and the pounding of my heart. It's stayed like this for what seemed like a few minutes, and the footsteps continued, closing the distance between it and the spare room. The door slowly creaked open. Lingering ajar momentarily, my heart was ready to leap out of my chest. My mouth was dry and sweat stuck my clothes to my skin. That was it, I thought. As I waited for something to come into the room, nothing happened. Again came the excruciating silence, this time lasting for what felt like hours and hours on end. Nothing happened, and I was starting to believe that whatever it was had lost interest and left. Still, I sat in my corner, flashlight trained on the door opposite of me, slowly returning to a calmer state of mind. After God knows how long, my flashlight flickered out, leaving me in complete darkness. Frantically, I reached out for the lighter and flicked it on. My gaze shot towards the door. Still nothing. I looked around the room. Nothing. Slowly, I got up and crossed the room to the door. I closed it and sat with my back against it just in case. Still, there was only silence. Finally, I let out a sigh of relief. It was gone. I went to flip the light switch, but still the power was out. So I lit the candle instead, and that's when I became aware of something standing in the opposite corner of the room. My heart froze in my chest and my lungs refused to work. It hadn't been there before, but it was now. In a frenzy to get up and run, I had knocked the candle over and it went out. I gripped the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. I was stuck, locked inside with God knows what. I searched the floor for the lighter and flicked it on. I looked around, but the being was gone. Again, I was alone. Breathing heavily, I found the candle, all the while keeping my gaze on the far corner where it had been just moments before. Once I brought the lighter to the wick and life was breathed into the candle, it reappeared in the far corner, exactly as it had before. The candle gave it away. The first thing I noticed were its feet, flat, long, and bony. Its body was built the same way, abnormally skinny like a Holocaust victim, just skin wrapped in bone. It was short too, like a child. It only came up to my waist, if that. Its knobbly arms were just long enough that its long skinny fingers reached the ground as it stood straight up. It wore the remains of a tattered old gray cloak draped over its shoulders. Its face was something that is beyond words to describe. As best I can, it was bald, pale, and had no ears or nose that I could see. The mouth was thin and lacked proportion, much like the rest of its body. And the eyes were round and lifeless, black orbs that simply reflected the candlelight. As I stared at it, its eyes seemed to calm me down. My heart rate slowed, my breathing steadied, and the urge to run faded away. Something about its eyes kept me gazing into them, unable to move, not wanting to if I could. I began to realize that it had followed me for quite some time. Not just since the grocery store, but it had been there when I was a child, watching me, waiting for me. It had followed me since then, and it had a purpose for me. I could feel its gaze drawing me in, helping me realize that I belonged with it. It stepped forward, slowly putting one foot in front of another, dragging its fingers across the ground. It came right up next to me, its gaze never leaving mine, as I stared down at it, and it up at me. It slowly raised one arm, holding out its long, thin hand. Its fingers were about twice my size, and I knew that normally this would be something to be afraid of. But as I gazed into the light reflected off its eyes, I began to forget my name, my past, and myself. I took its hand and it patted my hand with its other hand. It took the candle and led me out of the door, down the stairs, and out into the yard. Together we walked down the street and up to the forest, the candle lighting our path. I stepped at the edge of the woods and looked back at the city. The creature tugged on my arm, insisting that I follow. I looked into its eyes, and all of the worries were gone. Somehow I knew I had to hurry, because the others were waiting. I was not the first one he had found, nor would I be the last. I was going to join the others. I kept on walking, following the path that had led me down, lit by a mixture of candles and moonlight. As we strode, the wind picked up and the candle was blown out. It dropped to the forest floor with a thud. I looked around frantically for my guide, but it had disappeared. Still, there was the grip on my hand, pulling me down the path lit by the moonlight. I would never be seen again. When I was a kid, my parents and I moved to a large house in one of the bad parts of our city. In reality, the neighborhood wasn't that bad for some people. I was never particularly comfortable in that house, especially upstairs where the bedrooms were. For the first couple of years, it was just an uneasy feeling. I kept my dog with me, and that kept me secure. I didn't know it until after we'd move out from the house, but my mom would find the clean laundry that she hadn't folded yet neatly folded up in the basket. Sometimes when I was trying to go to sleep, there'd be a noise like a clock ticking away, despite there being no clock like that in the upstairs of the house. Then the footsteps started when my dad started working out of town. No matter what floor you were on, you would hear footsteps above you. There were light steps like a child or small woman. There were also heavy steps, like a man wearing boots. My dog stayed with me all of the time. Bear liked to sleep where he could watch, so at night he would sleep at the top of the stairs in front of all the 3 bedrooms. That was always good enough for me, until the night I met her. I was going to sleep on the bottom bunk, and I noticed long brown hair dangling from the top bunk. It started coming down farther and farther until I saw a crescent of a forehead. Then the eyes that tied my stomach in knots. The eyes that I will see when I close mine. I saw eyes bulging out of their sockets, white and veiny, but no pupils or retinas, staring at me. I could feel that pressure like someone staring at you like you have 3 heads. I screamed. I know I did. I think I might have actually rattled the windows with it. Bear didn't budge. No one came to see what was happening. She looked about my age, 7 or 8, and her lips were cut or cracked right through the lip in multiple places right to that normal skin. Her mouth opened, and all that came out was what I can only identify to this day as old cheese and rotting flesh. I don't know how long I screamed, but my voice gave up. It just quit. She was reaching for me with these busted up fingers, like all the bones and joints had been broken over and over. The cracked and dried out skin was like frozen sandpaper against my cheek. "Wanna play with my dollies?" I couldn't and still cannot remember what happened after that. My parents swore they never heard me scream. After that, I tried to avoid being in my room by myself. When I did manage to be upstairs by myself, I heard jumping or skipping in the attic and from between or from the other side of the walls. After a few months of hearing the thumping, I got used to it. I hadn't seen the girl in a while, though there were a few times I'd see lacy fabric flapping past doorways through the corner of my eye. One day, the boy next door was over and we were playing in the spare bedroom. There's a bunch of old dolls in the attic, you know. I froze and remembered the little brown-haired girl. Really? How do you know? The people who lived here before you guys told me about them. I held back the questions bubbling up inside of me. That night, not long after I was put into bed, a large lump popped up under my blanket. I kicked at it fruitlessly, and it was like a freezing pocket of air. It advanced towards me. She was right there, between me and the blanket. "I told you I had dollies." I tried to respond, scream, kick, anything. Nothing happened. All my body would do is shiver from the cold and heave from the smell. "Can't you hear all the fun we have in my room? Come play with me." She rolled off my bed and through the wall that my room shared with the spare bedroom with attic access. I tossed and turned the rest of the night. Eventually, I snuck into my mom's room for the night. I couldn't escape the thumps and bumps from the attic though. After weeks of not being able to sleep and having to sneak into my mom's room for even a little bit of sleep, I made my decision. I waited until after school and went to get one of the kids a few houses down that I didn't particularly like. "I heard there are some really cool old toys up in the attic. Do you want to go look at them with me?" He seemed leery at first, but we were all poor and I guess his imagination got the best of him. I brought him into the house. I got the hole to the attic open and pulled the steps down. "I have to go to the bathroom." "Oh, okay." I was halfway down the steps when I heard the steps creak as he started to climb up. I crept up as quietly as I could. I heard him take a few steps, then laughter. Some was his, some belonged to what sounded like a few other kids. I climbed the steps into the attic. I only went high enough to poke my head in. The kid from down the street was hanging from the rafters. Farther back, over my room by the chimney, there was a little girl in a lacy gown. She was also hanging from the rafters, with cobwebs hanging from her. Her skin was like leather pulled tight over the bone. She had a circle of dolls surrounding her. I couldn't see very well, but the dolls whose faces I could see had the same leathery look that she did. I felt a burning around my wrists and ankles. Then no matter how hard I resisted, I couldn't stop climbing the steps up further. It was like dozens of little hands were making me their puppet. I heard the faint sound of banging on the front door. The little girl came up from behind me. Her brow was furrowed with a deep frown across her lips. "I didn't ask him to come play with us." I heard heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. The little girl wasn't angry anymore. I felt the tiny hands release me. She wasn't even looking at me. She was staring at the attic hole. Her bottom lip quivered. She backed up slowly and rubbed her broken hands together. She backed up through the chimney and disappeared. I was in such a hurry to get out of that I tumbled down the steps to the attic. I stumbled down the steps through a thick pocket of cold air. The boy's parents were knocking on the door. I told them we'd been playing upstairs and I hadn't been able to find him after I came down to the kitchen for something. I helped them search the house. I let them check the attic. I pretended to look through my mom's room for him while they were up there. I was sure I would be blamed. They found nothing. We moved from that house not much after that boy disappeared. My mom and dad were convinced that the neighborhood had become too dangerous for us. They still don't believe me about the little girl. I'm in my mid-20s now, and I still drive through the old neighborhood sometimes. The house is still there, and is constantly on and off the market. I always look up in my window when I pass the house, and there she is, waiting for more dolls to play with. Here's what you'll need to do this ritual. A mirror of any type, a candle of any size or color. Friends to do it with, optional but highly suggested. I should probably warn you, once you begin this ritual, there is no way to stop it. What I'm saying is, don't start it unless you are planning to finish it. Have you ever broken a mirror by accident or on purpose? Have you ever looked into a mirror and felt like there was something watching you from the other side, or seen something sinister looking within the eyes of your own reflection? You've probably heard the legend that breaking a mirror is 7 years of bad luck. Legends about mirrors have been around for hundreds of years. In particular, some ancient civilizations believed that there was a sort of purifying effect to mirrors. They believed that by looking one's reflection in the eyes, it would transfer a person's negative energy into the reflection in the mirror. They believed that this had a cleansing effect, but also hidden dangers. That's why breaking a mirror has been known to cause bad luck. Think about it. If this is true, then every time you look into a mirror, you are transferring negative energy into it. Can you imagine just how much negative energy is just sitting there inside your bathroom mirror? When you break the mirror, that negative energy is released and causes bad luck for everyone around it. For this ritual to work, you will need a mirror that you don't mind breaking. According to the manifesto, both the risk and the eventual reward for this ritual are stronger depending on how old the mirror is. It makes sense if you think about it. An older mirror has been looked into more, and therefore has more negative energy inside of it. In order to begin the ritual, you must look your reflection in the eyes, transferring your negative energy into the mirror one last time. You only need to do this for a few seconds. Then, you need to lean forward and breathe onto the mirror, making it fog up with your breath. My sources refer to this as anointing the mirror with your breath. At first, you might find this strange, but do a little digging and I think you'll find that the word breath once meant something similar to spirit. By breathing on the mirror, you are symbolically linking yourself to the mirror and to the negative energy contained inside. This linking is critical to the success of the ritual. Everyone in the group needs to do this step as well, before moving on to the next one. After this is completed, you can light the candle. Use the candle to burn the mirror. This agitates the negative energy inside. You only need to do this for a few seconds, or until there is a noticeable black mark on the mirror. Note that the longer you do this for, the more agitated the negative energy will become. After this, the final step is breaking the mirror. Once this step is done, I suggest you start running. You see, it's actually a common misconception that when a person breaks a mirror, they will be followed by bad luck. This is not true. When a mirror is broken, the bad energy stays in one spot, near the broken mirror, until it eventually dissipates. Or at least, normally it does. If you completed the steps above, then you have tied yourself to the negative energies through the medium of your breath. This means that the negative energy will pursue you wherever you go. This is why I said earlier that it would be best to complete this ritual with a group. If there is only one person doing this ritual, then all the negative energy will pursue that one person. But if there is a group, then the negative energy will be spread more thinly. This increases your odds of survival. Bad luck will follow you throughout the night. At first, it will start out as small incidents, a chipped nail or a flat tire. The incidents will begin to escalate though, as increasingly horrific things begin to happen around you. Eventually, these incidents will become life-threatening, no matter how many people you did the ritual with. Like I said, don't start this ritual unless you're planning to finish it. The only piece of advice I can give you for surviving the night is to remember that the negative energy is linked to you through your breath. Your breath is how the negative energy detects you, and so, if you find yourself in a bad situation, try holding your breath. This should make you temporarily invisible to it. Of course, you can only hold your breath for so long. Still, this technique might provide you with a few extra seconds to get out of a dangerous situation. At this point, you are probably asking yourself, why on earth would anyone ever engage in this ritual? Why would anyone ever risk their life like this? Well, most people who tried this probably didn't think that it would actually work. But there is a reason beyond that. The bad luck will chase you throughout the night, but if you manage to survive until dawn, not only will you find that your run of foul luck has ended, but that a new streak of good luck is about to begin. The first lights of dawn have a special purifying property. If you survive until the morning, then the negative energy inside the mirror will be purified and will re-enter your body, filling you to the brim with positive energy. After this, everything will seem to go your way. You'll find that people are generally nicer to you and that the opposite sex are extremely attracted to you, or the same sex, if that's your thing. You will succeed at everything you do, whether it be a job interview, an important exam, or a business venture. I would highly suggest buying a lottery ticket. It should be noted that the amount and duration of your good luck will be equivalent to the amount of negative energy that was in the mirror. If you just bought the mirror at the store, then the good luck will only last a couple of days and will not be all that severe. If you use an old mirror though, then your lucky streak will be far more powerful and it may last for months or even years if you had an old enough mirror. If you use a mirror that has a more personal connection to you, such as a bathroom mirror or a mirror from your bedroom, then the good fortune you experience will be more suited to your particular tastes and desires. One more thing I should probably warn you about is the timing of the ritual. The ritual needs to be started after sunset and with at least 6 hours until dawn. Two common tricks that people try to use in regards to this ritual are starting during the daytime and starting a few minutes before dawn. Starting near dawn is probably the least dangerous of these little cheats. If you start near the dawn, then the negative energy will not have enough time to fully manifest before being purified. The energy will then simply dissipate into the air rather than doing anything, and you will probably walk away thinking it was all a gigantic hoax. Starting during the day is more dangerous. People start during the day thinking that the daylight will instantly nuke the bad energy and keep them safe. This is not true. Notice that I said it was the lights of dawn that have the purifying power, not the light of day. By starting during the day, you actually give the bad luck more time to pursue you and thus decrease your odds of survival significantly. You know, a lot of people might call you stupid or crazy for trying to attempt this ritual. I wouldn't though. I can understand the thinking that goes into it. I can understand wanting to take control of your luck, both good and bad, rather than accepting the seemingly random twists and turns that life seems to throw at us. The illusionist is a creature I've sighted numerous times over the course of my life. I had to name it myself as I failed to find any known record of it on the internet. I have no idea where it came from, what it wants, or how it will achieve its goal. Whatever the hell is going on, I don't like it. All I can manage to remake of what I saw. At this point in my life, paranormal experiences have been a something that I'm no stranger to. I'm used to it, but it still bothers me. The way my heart races every time something out of the ordinary happens, the sweat dripping into my shirt from my neck, my throat aching to scream at something only I can see. These things have been bothering me for about as long as I can remember, and only now do I piece together this reoccurring darkness. It all started when I was 2 to 3 years old. I had a habit of waking up early, usually around 8 to 9 a.m. I woke up on a weekend morning, next to my mother. Apparently, I had a nightmare that night, and my dad willingly gave up his spot on the bed for me and slept on the couch that night. The door of my mother's room was open for some reason, and that didn't bother me, so I decided to look out the door. After all, it was the only real source of light coming into the room, the curtains shielding out the morning sun. What I saw that morning was rather unsettling. It was my father, but he was different. His entire body looked tired, except for one thing. His eyes. Those eyes, they stared at me so viciously. His eyes were yellow, but not an unrealistic, glowing yellow. It was as if he were born with a yellow tint in the iris of his eyes. That yellow became vibrant, and it pierced right through me. His shadow was as if it didn't belong to him. It was huge, and it looked cloudy. He stepped out of the doorway and went back to the couch. His shadow lingered, and I thought maybe he stayed out of sight, but I heard his heavy body slide onto the couch from afar. After staring at it for what felt like hours, the shadow slid away, as it was being sucked into another dimension, back to where it came from. I didn't talk to my father all that day. That made him feel bad, and it made me feel bad too. Even at that age, I had some subconscious understanding of the fact that something else was controlling him at that moment. I just didn't know what it was, and I didn't want to. A few weeks passed, or maybe even a few years, I'm not sure. The way I process my childhood and the way I process these events in my head, all of this could have happened in one day in the way my mind bends time together. But I find it crucial that I know that these events happened at different intervals for the sake of my own sanity, which is slipping out of the hands of my decaying mind. I'm losing track, in more ways than one, so allow me to continue. One morning, I was having a very pleasant dream. We were in my school building, roasting marshmallows over a campfire. The dream was pleasant enough, until the fire began to smoke as if water were thrown on it. The smoke was thick, dark, and it was dancing gracefully, but morbidly. I woke up, not of shock, but of habit. At this point, I had a bed in my mother's room. The bed was perpendicular to the biggest window in the room, and it was the first thing I liked to look at whenever I woke up. There's a fire escape, a small leap away from that window, and what I saw standing in it paralyzed me. It was a woman, or at least that's what it wanted me to believe. It had these wrinkles. It didn't look like they were of age, but they were just there. They spread across her face like a system of highways, but the wrinkles were deep like canyons. Her facial features, or lack of them, is what terrified me the most. At this point, I'm making her sound like a Slender Man female clone, a slender woman, but she is more of his antonym. Maybe it was the dress that she was wearing, but she was anything far from slender. It was this big, wide thing that seemed to leak off her body, like some sort of demeanor. Her face, it haunts me as I write this. I feel the sweat drip into my shirt as I even think about her appearance. In place of her eyes are two holes. It's not as if her eyes were gouged out. There would be dry blood on her hideous face. It's as if her eyes were never there. Despite her lack of eyes, I can feel her looking into my soul. Her nose was similar, but didn't really serve any other purpose than making her the hideous mess she is. One of the hardest things to grasp at is her mouth. It wasn't there, but it was. The wrinkles in that area merged together to form one morbid wrinkle that was a good inch deeper than the rest. I thought it was my sleepy mind playing tricks on me, but I blinked and she was still there. She slowly opened her mouth, and her throat and face contorted in ways that would imply that she was screaming very forcefully, but I didn't hear a thing. At that moment, she left. I didn't see her leave, just as I didn't see her arrive, but she was gone. At that point, I wasn't scared, but I did feel different. Angry for some reason. I awkwardly made my way out of bed and go into the bathroom. I was small, so I had to stand on the edge of the bathtub to see myself in the mirror so I can wash my face off and brush my teeth. What I saw almost threw me off the edge. For a split second, my irises, the tinted part of the eye for those who don't know, were the same tint I saw in my father's. At that moment, the anger vanished and fear set in. Was this what took over my father? Or was it merely a distraction for the real entity to do its dirty work? I never found out, and I'm still searching for answers. I'm searching for it. Fast forward a couple years, I'm 8 years old now. I'm laying down with my father watching some football game that I wasn't interested in. I start to feel a nervous sweat, an irrational, costless anger that I haven't felt in years. I look at my father and he looks tense, as if he wants to hurt something. I immediately thought of that woman. Can she be controlling us at the same time? Can she be here, right now, watching us, laughing? I see something that eases both me and my father's tension, but puts us in a state of childish curiosity. We see what looks like a small bundle of glowing white rags hovering just above the floor and sticking to the wall as it made its way to the bathroom. Intrigued by this presence, with my dad's permission, I go to the bathroom to investigate. As I slowly inch closer, I feel that undeniable rage coming back. I wanted to hurt things. I wasn't thinking straight, but at the same time, my primary drive to investigate overpowered me. When I reach the bathroom, the anger goes away and I feel nothing. I feel numb. I don't feel happiness. I don't feel sadness. I don't feel safe, and I don't feel endangered. I just feel numb. The feeling that something is watching me starts to kick in. I feel the sweats again, but this time, I feel cold. I hear footsteps behind me, but they're coming from my mind. I can feel them edging closer, from one part of my mind into another, coming closer into reality. The footsteps stop, and so does the feeling of being overlooked. I turn around, and the bathroom door closes in front of me. The way it closed was so swift, yet so slow. It didn't slam. I had no reason to stop, but something in me was so startled by the slight movement of the door, and that paralyzed me until the door silently shut. I feel a push, and I turn around and let my hands hit the sink before I bashed headfirst into the mirror. I look at my reflection and am relieved to see that I'm still myself. The light begins to dim. This normally happens, but at the circumstances of this situation, it wasn't helping the way I felt. The light got bright, then it flickered off and felt like a strobe light for a moment. The light goes back on, and I'm scared to look in the mirror. Something didn't feel right, and when I looked up, I knew why. My eyes were that tint of yellow again, but this time, it was my entire eyes. I didn't have an iris on either eye. They were just glowing. I stayed that way for a good minute. The light flickered on and off, and I was back to normal. I yanked the bathroom door hard, expecting whatever that thing was to have locked it, but I ended up opening the door so hard that I drove my hand into the wall along with the doorknob, yanking that out and severely bruising my hand. I go to the couch and tell my dad what happened and find him sleeping. I tap him to wake up. His eyes slowly open and are yellow, just like the day he stared at me. Only this time, they ominously roll back into his head. They never came back down, only a set of his natural dark brown irises come back, as if his eyes were stamp rollers. I pretended that didn't faze me and told him what I did to my hand. I help him off of the couch, and as we head to the kitchen, we are startled. There's a woman, in pajamas with a red towel covering her face. At first, it doesn't scare us. It's a prank my mom would pull on us a lot, but after a while, it was disturbing. We never had a red towel, and that towel didn't look like it was woven in red cloth, more like it was covered in blood. Despite its covered face, I could feel it staring at me. Dark mist surrounded it. I felt its presence more than I could see it. And the anger. The rage was coming back. There was no holding back now. I had something to take my rage out on. I ran to it with all my force and drove my fist into its gut, but my arm had sliced only through air, and whatever we saw was gone, leaving behind only a feeling of confusion and fear. Other than the silent paranoia between my father and I, nothing else eventful happened that night. Fast forward 4 years later, I'm 12 years old. At this age I was very obsessed with snakes, and would spend hours a day looking at pictures of them and reading guides on how to properly care for your snake, but I never owned one. One particular night, my mother and sister had left me alone in the house to go wash clothes. I was doing the usual, looking at snakes as if they were my religion. I saw something at the top of my eyes, a darkness flying over my head. It looked like a small white object that I saw heading to the bathroom, but it was pitch black, and there's multiple of them circling over me. I shut down the computer and jump into my mother's bed. I'm scared out of my mind. I huddle under her blankets and I can see them circling over me through the thin sheets. I try to calm down and somehow manage to fall asleep, and the dream happens. I'm walking through a dark, lifeless forest. I see her standing there. She's very formidable, but familiar to her presence and very knowing of her capability to possess. I stand in front of her. My hatred for her burns, and she can see that. She speaks not a single word out of that putrid mouth, but she communicates with me. What she says worries me. Is it true? I didn't believe her then, but I'm starting to now. You are the only one who knows of my existence, and I want to keep it that way. You've never seen anything like me, and I've never seen anything like you. You are so strong. You are so devoted to find out what I am. The illusionist, you call me. I give no illusion. Believe your eyes. I tell no lies. Only the truth. Keep me a secret, for every time you speak of me, I will torment you when you least expect it. Try finding records of me on the internet. You won't. I am your little monster. I'm your dirtiest secret, she says. Only she didn't say it. She carved it into my soul. I am your little monster. I'm your dirtiest secret. Those words will haunt me forever. Every day I wake, I remember those words. But now I don't care anymore. Now you know. Now she'll burden you. Fast forward, now I'm 15. This happened only last month. I began to know of the Slender Man, and I go to my friend's house to talk about him. As I leave his apartment, I see an average height, suited man standing at the edge of the hallway. His face was obscured by the distance, almost looked faceless, but the timing was too convenient. That was no Slender Man. I remember how noticeable its eyes were. So easy to spot because they were so dark. They looked into me and reawakened the darkest terrors in me. All that happened in one short second, yet I remember it so vividly. She knows me better than anyone now. Over the years, it gets to know you. It knows your fears. It knows your weaknesses. The illusionist was made possible by the fact that I acknowledged her existence into my mind. And now that you know of her, it's too late. If I told you at the beginning of this story that I was lying, you'd believe me and she'd never get you. But now that you know I'm telling the truth, you'll suffer just like I did. All the paranoia I feel now will boil up in your mind until your sanity decays like mine. Until your sanity is as pure as the illusionist is. She'll appear to you as she did to me. An old lady with no eyes, no nose, and no mouth. Just dark holes to stare into your soul. Knowing you better than you know yourself in an instant. She wanted to stay a secret, but I won't let myself be the only person to suffer this any longer. I've rendered as best as I can with nothing but an old pencil and the last page of my journal what it looks like. Have you ever looked out of a window and let your thoughts run free? You should really stop doing that. That's my story. The encounters. Has this ever happened to anyone? Have you ever met a creature so bent on creating your insanity that it morphed into everything you fear? The room was dull and dark. No lights were lit. The light that did fill the room came from the moon, whose aura filtered through the blinds clothing the windows. There was a dark feeling in the room. It was strange. Something wasn't right. A man sat on the couch against the gray wall. He was hunched forward. His fingers hung over his knees. Red. They dripped red. A warm red. Blood. But it might have been his own blood. He had just puked it everywhere. It was all over him. And his head was throbbing. He was sweating from a fear that was stirring inside him. He felt almost dizzy but remained conscious. He looked onward at the walls around him and the doors he'd nailed and taped shut. He suddenly felt like he might puke again. He did. Bloody vomit spilled onto his bare feet. He stopped. He heard something moving to his left. In his hunched position, he turned his head. The wall was suddenly soaking wet. It looked like water was seeping straight through it, like it was rotting. And soon the water turned an eerie shade of red as something poked through the wall as though it were merely foam. A long gray hand, gaunt and famished, its fingers tipped with black claws. Its arm came through, followed by shoulders and a body that seemed distorted and awkwardly constructed as it twisted through and fell onto the floor. With its bony hands on the floor, it looked up. The man screamed. The figure was covered in a black cloak. It had a hood over its head. Its skin was a grayish and its face. It's horrible. The face was focused with two enormous white pupil, lacking eyes bordered by an oily black grease that radiated from their edges. It had no nose or hair. But the only other visible facial feature was a mouth. A gruesome, ominous mouth. The mouth was a smile that reached to the face's edges and was lipless. A crimson liquid, a warm fluid, with a coppery smell slipped from its mouth. Scarlet blood dripped down from there to its chin and fell to the ground after that. There was a strange, clicking sound, or gurgling, it was hard to tell. But it appeared to come from the entity's pulsating throat. It crawled forward on its hands and knees, the man screaming and getting up before it could slink any further. He backed through the entrance to the kitchen and grabbed the knife he'd prepared on the table. He stormed back into the living room to find it was gone. But the moist mold on the wall still remained. He'd have to board it back up. He walked around the room, checking behind furniture to see if this creature was hiding anywhere. Nothing. He looked in the other rooms. Nothing. But he dared not to go down into the basement, the place the entity had ferociously, relentlessly, and ruthlessly claimed for itself. A dark place. A place he didn't have much light for. He sat down on the couch again, still shaking from the sight earlier. He sat the knife down on the coffee table in front of him. He then wrote with black pen on paper, "My name is Paul Norman. I am 28 years old. I live in Fayetteville, Kentucky. He had read somewhere that writing those things helps with slowly crawling back to reality, trying to detach him from insanity. By this point, he believed he had truly gone insane. Partly the reason he refused to leave his house. He didn't want to make a scene in public. What if he saw the creature out there? Would he shout and scream in front of people? He knew only he could see the smiling man. That was when he felt something touch his butt. It made its way onto his hip. He looked over, gasping and jumping up as he saw a gray hand squeezing from the couch cushions. It slid away quickly upon realization that he'd spotted it. Paul then ran into his bedroom and closed the door. He looked in his mirror. Enormous bags were under his eyes. He hadn't slept in almost a week. Not since what had been happening when he did fall in slumber. He saw something move in the mirror behind him, and then the next thing he knew, he was laying on his bed. The face was staring down at him, looming over him. It spoke. It had a voice like a million whispers, like the whistle of the wind, like a billion snakes hissing together, like 100 souls all shrieking and shrilling at once. Sweet dreams. It ran its fingers across his eyes, closing them, and instantly he fell for it. He was lost in sleep. It was a rather peaceful sleep, one that gave him a lot of rest. But there was a moment in the night where it wasn't so subtle. He saw the face of the figure in the dream. He saw it clearly and fearfully. For a moment, though, Paul was looking through its very eyes at himself. Then it was back into his own point of view. The figure didn't seem to attack him, but some horrible, indescribable feeling spread in an aura from the creature to him. It was painful. It was head-splitting and shot a horrible pain in his head. He felt in reality, too. Then he felt like he couldn't breathe, like something was trying to crawl out from inside him. Whatever it wasn't a good feeling. He felt like his lung pipes were clogged. Something was happening as he couldn't get the breath from his chest. Finally, his eyes shot open. He gasped for breath and sat up quickly. There was a loud ringing in his ears and his vision was blurry. He had some sort of horrible sensation spreading in his head, like it was about to implode. Far worse than the feeling he'd felt earlier. It was terrible. It felt like the walls of his skull was about to cave in. Like his eyes might sink back and be swallowed by the rest of his head. He vomited. Red blood poured from his mouth and sweat was soaking the bed. He didn't see the figure anywhere, so he got up. He tried to walk, his head still under the horrible headache or whatever it was that was going on. His vision slowly got better and the ringing in his ears stopped. But that feeling just continued. "Where are you?" he screamed out. "I'm done. Just kill me already." He wandered around the living room, shouting and cursing and occasionally beating on the walls with his fists. Suddenly he heard a knocking on one of the doors he'd nailed shut. There was scratching and a bit of thumping that followed. He went into his room to fetch his hammer to remove the nails. When he had returned, that boards were already removed. He hesitated, feeling something shift in his stomach. Then he eased forward, drifting out and extending his free hand to the doorknob. It quickly dampened from his sweaty palm. He twisted it and opened it only a few inches before he hurriedly backed away towards the other side of the room. What was behind the room was pitch black. Paul heard the gurgling sound again. He saw a few gaunt fingers stretch out and grasp the side of the door, pulling it open more. Then he saw the slippery body step forward, this time not crawling but hunched over and touching the ground occasionally with the tips of its fingers. He threw the hammer at the thing, intending to kill it if he could. There was a shriek that emitted when the hammer hit. The creature backed away to the other side of the room. Its face looks up at him, still smiling. Paul was growing afraid and angry. His heart pounded in his chest as the feeling in his head intensified. It got to the point where he couldn't stand. He fell on his knees, vomiting again. He coughed and hacked. Sick saliva spilled from his mouth. The creature crawled on all fours now and looked at Paul at eye level. It was now hiding under the coffee table, smiling at him. He groped around the floor for the hammer, not taking his eyes off the creature. The figure spoke again. "Whisper with me," it said. Paul was shaking. He watched as the figure simply sat there and a word being engraved in the wall behind it. "Whisperer," it said clearly, blood dripping out of the engravings as though the house was bleeding after being wounded by the Whisperer's claws, which, though it never touched the wall, still seemed to have been there. The Whisperer tilted its head, still smiling. Paul was still looking for the hammer. His hand finally found it. His finger tapped the surface. The creature lunged. It sprang from under the table violently, screeching a dreadful, horrendous shrill, a shriek that made his ears bleed. It tackled him, sinking what might have been fangs into his shoulder. He screams as he kicks the entity away, grasping the hammer once more. He grabbed the figure, bashed it in the head violently. A bit of blood splattered from the back of its hood, but somehow, it didn't die. It gave a screech and backed away, but afterwards it seemed unfazed. Paul was trembling. He felt his pants grow moist. The Whisperer looked back up at him and flailed forward, screaming like a complete animal. Its claws shot forward, striking Paul in the hip. He slid away, dodging whatever he could. He threw the hammer, striking the Whisperer in the side. It let out a low yowl before it continued to crawl forward. This time, the creature sat and simply stared at him. Though it was smiling, there was something angry about it. There was something that resembled pure rage, but its face could only express its scarlet smile, which continued to drip with blood. Paul remembered when he first saw it. He thought that it was injured and bleeding from the inside out, but it just kept coming, and it smelled strong, far stronger than normal blood. Paul made his way across the floor to the coffee table and grabbed the knife from earlier. He screamed, ran forward, and tackled the monster. He stuck the knife in its neck, or what it looked like at least. It was hollow, gasping from it. Suddenly, more arms slung out from all edges of the being and twisted Paul off of it. The knife was now laying in the floor, with blood soaking every inch of it. The creature was moaning, making some strange, hoarse breathing before it all stopped. Its neck stretched, its head tilted around, as if to pop its neck. Then it began to slowly peer over its shoulder and simply glare at Paul. Its bloody claws tapped on the ground. He glared at it. Several extra limbs were crawling across its body, stretching and moving. They writhed. Arms seemed to sprout and move into different locations across its body, and then disappear again. It stuck its fingers into the carpet, sinking its claws into the floor. Paul's heart jumped. His head's condition only grew worse as his stomach gurgled. Suddenly, a hand shot out from the carpet, blowing a hole in the ground. It grabbed him by the neck, squeezing and relentlessly pulling downwards. Paul tried to resist. He tried, but a ringing sound grew again in his ears. His vision blurred. He began to see things in shades of red and gray. He heard the Whisperer gurgle again and let out a rasp. The hand in the floor just kept choking him. It malevolently pressed the breath out of him. He wanted to scream, but it only got tangled in his vocal cords as his throat was clenched. Though he managed to break free, the hand was now gone. A hole in the floor remained. It looked around the room. his vision began to return to normal. The whisperer was gone. He picked himself up, coughing, and sat back down on the couch. He heard a knock on his front door. He knew it may very well be the creature again. So as he approached, he picked up the knife laying on the floor and readied it. He opened the door quickly, shouting and screaming as he held the knife up. He heard a girlish shrill before him, and as he halted his attack, he saw a woman his age with long, wavy brown hair standing before him. Her eyes were deep blue, and her tan-skinned arms in front of her face as a shield. It was Annie, Paul's girlfriend, or ex-girlfriend. When she had been convinced that he was sick, something was wrong with him, she left him for her own safety. "Annie? What are you doing here?" he asked. I just came to check up on you," she said fearfully as she fell back against one of the railings along the porch. She was obviously filled with fear at the sight of Paul covered in blood, pale looking and screaming with a knife in his hands. By now, though, he'd lowered it to his side. It was lucky enough not many houses were within range to hear his shouts or see his bloody appearance. "Annie, I'm so sorry," he said solemnly. "Paul, you need to get help." What have you done?" She screamed at the blood. Her eyes teared up and soon flooded over. Paul only sighed as he tried to step forward, but Annie was already stepping off the porch. With every step he took forward, she stepped back. It's the Whisperer, just like I said before," Paul said. "Annie, don't you believe me?" he asked desperately. His blood-stricken hands fumbled. Oh yes, Paul. I believe you," she said sorrowfully. Her eyes were dripping, her soft cheeks soaking with tears now. She had lied, but only because she was afraid of what Paul might do if she said no. She was heartbroken. She once loved him, still loved him, had a difficult time detaching from him. "Now I'm going to go now. I'll see you later, Paul. It was nice chatting," she said before she turned back to her car and got inside. But she didn't take off just yet. She had to sit, clear her mind. Meanwhile, Paul retreated back into his own house. As he walked back inside, he shut the door behind him. Then he felt something push him. He fell on the ground, then he was dragged by the legs by some unseen force. It took a moment for the entity to appear. The cloaked creature dragged him across the ground and finally into the fireplace, where his face also sat. The force dragging him was unseen again. Now he simply saw a web of gray arms reaching out for him. They grabbed him, and the face of the creature looked at him. Those enormous white eyes seemed to light a fire inside of him. The Whisperer creeped forward, the arms vanishing, and finally he grabbed Paul by the face. Annie was still crying. Her arms were stretched over the wheel of her car as she sobbed into them. Her skin was soaking with the water from her eyes. It was then she heard a horrendous scream coming from the house in front of her. She looked up quickly. It was Paul's scream. She stretched her neck to see if she could get any view inside through the windows, but the blinds and curtains were shut. That was when she had turned her head and screamed at the sight of something staring at her through the passenger side window. A gray face. A gray face with white eyes and an enormous grin of blood. Its face was covered in blood, an excessive amount of blood, and its black cloak and hood were soaking with the deep scarlet as well. Annie immediately backed out of the driveway and drove away.
I I think everyone wants a hobby that they can feel better at than most people. For me, it's been street art. Not the graffiti you see on walls, it's just fancy text saying the user's alias. But for me, I like to use stencils made from the photographs that I vectorize and print and cut out. I don't do anything too political or Banksy, like, I usually just take some iconic figures and plaster them on a wall. Now, I like to picture these on a fairly large wall before I present them to the public, and living in an apartment with a roommate can make that difficult to do at home, so I used to just go around in the late afternoons looking for some abandoned or condemned buildings. I would usually keep to the industrial district of my city, looking for a nice little building where the previous business just couldn't afford to stay in business, but I was having a particularly hard time finding one this other night, so I decided to venture on the outskirts of the city. I was riding my bike down this road that led away into more of a country area. I took a couple small roads and ended up at this pretty gnarly looking house. You should have seen it. The grass there looked like it hadn't been cut in years. The house itself looked pretty bare bones. I mean, it looked unpainted, but the wood wasn't rotten or old. In fact, I'd say the house couldn't be more than a few decades old. The house was pretty out of the way, and I couldn't see any signs from the outside that any person had even gone into the house in a few good years, so I decided that this would be the building to tag in. I hopped off my bike and began a treacherous journey through the waist-high grass, constantly stumbling and nearly face-planting a few times before I reached the front door. The door itself had a rectangular window with a stylistic blur on it that allowed me to see basic forms on the inside of the house. It didn't seem that well lit in the house, so I couldn't make out too much, but I did see what looked like a couch and a hallway extending further back into the house. I gave the doorknob a try and found, to my surprise, it was unlocked. The door squeaked like no door I'd ever heard before, though, which made me cringe as it broke the otherwise pleasant silence. I entered the house and filled the interior of the house with daylight from the outside world. I could see everything in there so much clearer now that there was light and no glass to block my vision. I saw the couch, which actually just turned out to be a love seat, and the rest of the living room, which contained a circular glass coffee table, fairly low to the ground, and a TV on a TV stand. It looked all untouched, which surprised me, for I imagined the house would be completely empty from either the fleeing residents or perhaps some looters. If it hadn't been for the dust that had been accumulating over everything, I would have thought this house was still being lived in. I walked up to the TV and tried to turn it on from the power button on the front. No surprise there, it didn't work. I considered taking this TV with me, but it would be nearly impossible to carry on my bike all the way home. I actually thought about bringing my car here and furnishing the rest of my apartment with all the things the previous residents had left behind. It was like a jackpot find. I was excited and decided to explore around the house for more valuables before spray painting. I entered the kitchen and was met with a pungent smell and soon found the source looking in the refrigerator. I allowed an audible bleh as I was punched in the face with the smell of the rotten milk that lay in front of me, along with a mixture of other rotten food. I did, however, see that they had a few cans of beer in there, so I tried one of them. It was flat, as I expected, and tossed it around in the sink, making a loud clunking sound. I was done with this kitchen. The smell itself might have been the reason for that. I made my way back to the living room, and I noticed the hallway. Most of it was lit up well from the light the door was still pouring in. I made my way down the first door on the right. This room was very dark, so I went over to the curtains and windows to open them. The light revealed the room was barren, except for a few objects on the floor. There was a camera, a photo album, and a shoebox turned upside down. I was curious to know who the previous residents of the house were, so I picked up the photo album. On the front was a Polaroid photo being showcased. It was a picture taken of the family in the living room of this house. There was a pretty tall, thin man in a dress shirt tucked into his ironed-out black business pants with curly black hair grinning goofy to the camera in a Superman pose, who looked to be around 30. A woman with brown hair tied back wearing a white blouse and blue jeans who seemed to be face-palming but also smiling happily, who was around the same age. And a little girl sitting on the floor with her legs crossed, who looked up to be around 8 years old, grinning at the camera. I flipped the picture over and saw the date had been written on it. It was dated about 3 years ago. I looked through the album and saw photos of the family at various places. I put the album down and picked up the overturned shoebox, and photos came pouring out of it face down. I saw dates on the back of every one of them, and they looked to be in order. Thankfully, they hadn't scattered around too much, so I was able to neatly slide them together and flip them around. I was greeted in a very plain photo of the hallway I'd just been in. Everything had been there that I'd seen before. The 2 doors on the right, the one on the left, the brown carpet with the dark outline, and the vent about half the size of me at the end of the hall. The picture seemed to be taken at night with flash, which made me even more curious to the point of this picture. I couldn't see anything wrong or out of the ordinary, so I started to think of possible reasons, but suddenly I was interrupted by a small white shape from the corner of my eye. I heard a purr, and I looked to see the source of the disturbance. It was a white, short-haired cat coming to me. I was surprised to see such a clean and domesticated house pet in a place like this, and I wondered to myself whether this was just the owner's previous pet. But I just couldn't understand how they could leave it behind. It then rubbed against my leg, and I reached down to pet it. As I did, its purrs grew louder, and I said out loud, "You're so adorable." It meowed to me as if in response, and continued purring. I stopped petting it and went back to the photos. I shuffled through the rest, and they looked all to be like this one. Various rooms of the house taken at night with flash. They were duplicates of each photo, though, or at least I thought they were duplicates, until I saw that they were different dates on the back marked. I started looking for differences in the hallway's pictures, but I was unable to find any differences aside from a slightly different camera angle each night. I could see the cat had gotten bored of me at this point and dashed back out the window. I let out a disappointed sigh and went to the next set of photos of what I had gathered to be the master bedroom. I hadn't gone in there, so I took the photos and guessed that the door on the left in the hallway was the master bedroom. I was right. And there it was, exactly like the photograph. I opened the window to let the light and air in and started to inspect the room. It wasn't particularly large. It was about the size of my bedroom in my apartment, honestly. Just enough room for a wardrobe, bed, TV, and a closet. On the TV stand was another picture lying face down, so I walked over and picked it up to inspect it. There was no date on the backside on this one, however, so I flipped it right side up to inspect it further. It was a picture of this room, but it was different from the ones I found in the box. It was taken at night still, but it used no flash. And instead of being taken from the doorway with no subject in the picture, it looked to be taken from right outside the window, and it showed 2 people lying in the bed sleeping. This picture made me feel a little uneasy. I was drawing all sorts of connection, even trying to connect it to why this house was so hastily abandoned. I mean, if it was ever abandoned. I thought maybe a serial killer killing the family and leaving the house behind. I got a little scared and stuffed the photo in my pocket. Luckily, there was still daylight, even if it was the last light of the day. I might have pissed my pants otherwise. Yeah, I get scared pretty easily, but what can you do? Anyway, I went up to the closet and opened it to find it contained some jackets, shoes hanging on the wall, and some shoe boxes scattered about on the floor of the closet. I grabbed the nearest one and found it to be especially heavy and took it to the bed. I sat down and removed the top and found that it had been filled with what appeared to be salt and a couple scoops. I didn't understand why salt was in a shoebox at all, so I grabbed the other 2 remaining boxes. One contained a revolver and a plastic bag containing some of what appears to be some homemade, crude, shiny bullets, along with several roughly forged knives appearing to be made of different metal. I was definitely taking this stuff, so I packed it all in my backpack. Finally, I opened the last box, which was lighter than the rest, only to find a hand? Yeah, I said a hand. It looked like a Halloween decoration, so I picked it up and inspected it. It was dried up, but I was starting to tell that it was real. I shuddered and threw it back in the box and wiped my hands on the bed. I was done in this room, and I was just about done in this house. But I still had one more room to inspect. I opened the last door expecting to find the little girl's room, but I was met with a bathroom instead. The bathroom wasn't as well kept as the others. It was dingy and grimy, and there were brown spots scattered about the bathtub and floor. There were no toiletries to be seen anywhere, meaning no towels, soap, toothbrushes, or even toilet paper. I found no reason to stay in there, as there were no pictures of this room. As I entered the hallway, I heard what sounded like someone getting out of bed from the master bedroom, but as I stood as still as a statue, I heard nothing else. I knew it wasn't my imagination, so I pinned it on the cat to ease my mind. I went into the living room and sat on a love seat as I looked over the last set of pictures. The little girl's room. There were twice as many pictures of this room from what I can tell. The first picture being taken from the doorway like the other pictures of the master bedroom didn't show anything unusual. Even though I did notice that this picture had been the empty room I'd found these pictures in. I based this off the position of the window in the room, as well as the blue carpet. I continued looking through the next picture, where there was pretty much no difference. However, the third had a slight difference. A black blur near the foot of the child-sized bed. It was completely unrecognizable, and I was thinking that it might have been a blind spot on the camera, but I ruled that out as it looked more like a motion blur. It was about the height of a dog, but much longer. I couldn't see anything else, so I moved on to the next photos. They were taken from inside the room, with the bed being in the center of the frame, though the window was still visible. I wanted to compare the rooms, so I went back into the empty room and looked at the remaining photo. It was another photo of the bed in the center of the frame, but the flash from the camera wasn't affecting a portion of the frame, that portion being right in front of the bed. What I saw made me physically shiver. I saw a silhouette of what looked like a giant frog. No, a frog is a bad way to describe it. It's more like its legs were frog-like, extending out to the side while the long, narrow torso bended in front of it. I couldn't see any distinct head shape, though. But as I was thinking to myself, I heard the bedsheets move. It was time to go. I'd seen enough here. I crept my way to the door, attempting not to make much noise, as I heard a creak from the wooden floor behind me that was out of sync with my own footsteps. I froze for a second and heard them still coming from the end of the hallway. I was close to the door, so I just sprinted and tried for the doorknob. It was locked. I did not lock the door. As I struggled to open the door, whatever behind me knew I heard its presence, so it picked up its pace into a full run, its footsteps sounding like sledgehammers each time it impacted the ground. The growing volume terrified me like nothing else, but I managed to unlock the door and slam it behind me, and I sprinted off to my bike and pedaled for my life. I could still hear the banging and crashing of the door slam open, but I was long gone. I don't think I'll ever practice tagging in abandoned buildings anymore. I may just give it up. It's been a few days, and I haven't ever wanted to be alone since. I just remember those footsteps and the fear I experienced, and I still feel unsafe. And no, I'm not going to be disclosing the location of this house, so don't bother contacting me about it.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for listening to tonight's episode. I really appreciate it if you hit a like if you're watching on YouTube, or share it if you're watching this as a podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on the YouTube channel, and you can become a patron for only $5 a month to receive these episodes 2 days earlier before they even post. I appreciate all that you guys do for me, and never forget, don't sleep tonight.